Tom never imagined that his grandfather's final gift would lead to such trouble in his life. On a chilly autumn morning, he stood before the small wooden cabin that had been in his family for 3 generations. The lawyer had called last week to tell him about the inheritance, but Tom hadn't expected much. Maybe some old fishing gear or his grandfather's collection of handmade lures. Instead, he got the keys to the family cabin on Lake Blue Pine. "It, too, needs some love," Tom whispered to himself, running his hand along the weathered wood siding. The cabin wasn't much to look at from the outside. The dark green paint was peeling in places, showing the gray wood underneath. A few shingles had come loose from the roof during last winter's storms. The wooden steps to the front porch creaked under his weight, and the screen door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. But when Tom pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, memories from childhood summers washed over him. The smell of pine and old wood smoke from the stone fireplace. The handmade quilt draped over the back of the worn leather couch. The collection of fishing photos on the wall. His grandfather with record catches. His father learning to cast a line. And even little Tom himself holding up his first bluegill with a gap-toothed grin. Tom walked through the small living area to the kitchen with its old gas stove and hand-pumped sink. Beyond that were 2 small bedrooms with simple twin beds covered in faded plaid blankets. Everything was exactly as he remembered from those magical summer weeks spent at the lake. Through the back windows, the lake stretched out like a mirror, reflecting the forested hills and blue sky. "Pop always said this view was worth $1 million, Tom said to himself, stepping out onto the back deck. The wooden plank shifted slightly under his feet. Another repair to add to the growing list. But the view truly was priceless. The deck extended to a short path that led down to a small dock stretching about 20 feet into the clear water. A weathered rowboat was tied to the dock, gently bobbing in the small waves. Tom breathed deeply, taking in the pine-scented air. His life in the city had been nothing but stress lately. The tech company where he worked had been laying people off. His tiny apartment rent kept increasing, and the constant noise of traffic and neighbors had been giving him headaches. Standing here by the peaceful lake felt like stepping into another world. As he walked along the shoreline that wrapped around his property, Tom noticed something odd. At the edge of what he thought was his grandfather's land, someone had built a small beach area with picnic tables and a floating dock. A sign read, "Lakeside Estates Community Lake Access." Tom frowned, trying to remember if that had been there during his childhood visits. He didn't think so. Just as he was pondering this, a golf cart with property management painted on the side came rolling down a newly paved path Tom hadn't noticed before. A man with silver hair and expensive-looking sunglasses stopped the cart and looked Tom up and down with obvious disapproval. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice carrying that special tone people use when they're not actually offering help, but suggesting you're not supposed to be somewhere. "Just checking out my cabin," Tom replied with a friendly smile. "My grandfather left it to me." The man's eyebrows shot up. "Your old Bill's grandson? The one from the city?" Tom nodded. "That's right, I'm Tom. And you are?" "Robert Wilson, HOA president for Lakeside Estates." He gestured at the fancy houses visible through the trees. "Your grandfather was quite the character. Refused to sell this place even when we offered him 3 times what it was worth." Tom didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded again. "Well," Robert continued, looking past Tom at the cabin, "I suppose we should schedule a meeting soon. There are certain community standards that all properties need to meet now. Your grandfather was exempted due to his age and how long he'd been here, but now that ownership has changed hands." A knot formed in Tom's stomach. "What kind of standards?" Robert waved his hand dismissively. "Nothing too difficult. Approved paint colors, landscaping requirements, dock specifications, basic things, to keep property values high for everyone. The community has grown quite exclusive in recent years." Looking around, Tom now noticed what he hadn't seen before. Beyond the trees surrounding his grandfather's cabin, large modern houses with perfect lawns and matching boat docks lined the lake's edge. His grandfather's simple cabin, with its natural landscaping and weathered charm, stuck out like a sore, thumb among the luxury homes. "I'll need to think about that," Tom said carefully. "I'm not sure what my plans are yet." Robert's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. But do keep in mind that as a property bordering our community, there are certain expectations. The board will be very interested in your renovation plans." With that, he put the golf cart in reverse and backed away, then turned and drove up the path toward the larger homes. Tom stood there for a long moment, watching him go. Something about the interaction left him feeling uneasy. He walked back to the dock and sat down, dangling his feet over the edge into the cool water. A family of ducks paddled by, the little ones following their mother in a perfect line. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, Tom made up his mind. He would spend the weekend here cleaning up a bit and making a list of necessary repairs. The cabin might not be fancy, but it was his now, a piece of his family history that felt more like home than his apartment ever had. He didn't know then that the peaceful lake was about to become a battleground, or that the property line his grandfather had so carefully protected would become his greatest weapon in the fight ahead. For now, he simply watched the sunset and planned which room he would sleep in tonight, blissfully unaware of the storm clouds gathering on his horizon. The second weekend at the cabin, Tom arrived with a car full of cleaning supplies, basic tools, and enough food to last a few days. He planned to start tackling the most urgent repairs, fixing the leaky roof, replacing a few rotted boards on the deck, and clearing out the gutters. As he pulled up to the cabin, something bright orange caught his eye. Someone had taped a notice to his front door. Tom yanked it off and read it with growing disbelief. The letter, printed on fancy paper, with Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association at the top, listed a dozen so-called violations of community standards. The cabin's green paint was not from the approved color palette. The natural plants and wildflowers around the property were called overgrown weeds, creating potential fire and pest hazards. Even the old wooden dock was labeled structurally unsound and visually inconsistent with community waterfront standards. At the bottom of the page in bold letters was a deadline: 30 days to fix everything or face daily fines and possible legal action. The letter was signed by Robert Wilson, HOA president. "You've got to be kidding me," Tom muttered, crumpling the paper in his fist. He'd only owned the place for 2 weeks. And since when did his grandfather's cabin fall under HOA rules anyway? Tom tossed his bags inside and immediately called the lawyer who had handled his grandfather's will. After 20 minutes on hold, and another 10 explaining the situation, he finally got some answers. "Your grandfather's property predates the development by about 30 years, the lawyer explained. "He never signed any agreement to join their HOA. They've tried this before, actually. Your grandfather called me about it maybe 5 years ago." That made Tom feel slightly better. But he still spent the rest of the day looking over his shoulder, half expecting Robert Wilson to show up and lecture him about the peeling paint or the wildflowers growing along the path to the lake. The next morning, Tom was on a ladder cleaning leaves from the gutters when he heard voices approaching. He looked down to see a small group walking up his driveway as if they owned the place. Robert Wilson led the pack, followed by a woman in expensive-looking exercise clothes and a tall man carrying a clipboard and measuring tape. "Good morning," Robert called out with fake cheerfulness. "I see you've started some maintenance. That's a positive step." Tom climbed down from the ladder slowly, wiping his dirty hands on his jeans. "I'm just doing regular upkeep. Not because of that notice you left, which my lawyer says you have no right to enforce." The woman's eyebrows shot up and she exchanged a look with Robert. Tom noticed she was wearing a gold pin that said board member on her jacket. "I'm Nancy Parker, treasurer of the HOA," she said, extending a manicured hand which Tom reluctantly shook. "And this is Pete, our architectural compliance officer. We just wanted to discuss some concerns the community has about your property." Pete nodded importantly, holding up his clipboard. "We've put together some approved renovation plans that would bring the structure into compliance while maintaining some of its rustic charm." He said rustic charm the way someone might say dead skunk. Tom crossed his arms. "I'm not interested in any renovation plans. This cabin has been here longer than your fancy houses, And I'm not part of your HOA. Robert sighed, dramatically as if dealing with a stubborn child. Tom, I understand you have an emotional attachment to this place, but you need to understand the reality of the situation. This lake community has evolved into a premium residential area. Properties here sell for over $1 million. Having this, he waved his hand dismissively at the cabin, in the middle of our community affects everyone's property values. That sounds like your problem, not mine, Tom replied, feeling his temper rising. Nancy stepped forward. We're trying to be reasonable here. The association is even willing to help with some of the costs. We just need you to comply with basic standards. And if I don't? Tom asked. Pete cleared his throat. Then the board will be forced to pursue other options. There are county ordinances about property maintenance and safety that apply to everyone, HOA member or not. Tom felt his face growing hot. Are you threatening me? Not at all, Robert said smoothly. Just explaining the situation. Look around you, Tom. Every other property on this lake has been updated and properly maintained. Your grandfather was allowed certain liberties, out of respect for his age and status as the original resident. But times change. Just then, Tom's phone rang. It was his boss from the tech company, probably calling about the project Tom was supposed to be working on remotely. I need to take this, you all need to leave now. Think about what we've said, Nancy called as they reluctantly turned to go. The board meets next Tuesday. We'd love to see your improvement plans by then. Tom waited until they were out of sight. Before he slumped down on the porch steps, ignoring his still ringing phone, he felt overwhelmed and angry. Who did these people think they were? He looked out at the lake, watching a pair of loons diving for fish. This place had always been his sanctuary, even when he only visited occasionally. The thought of turning it into some cookie-cutter vacation home made his stomach turn. After a while, Tom went inside and dug through his grandfather's old desk. There had to be property documents somewhere. In the bottom drawer, he found a dusty folder labeled Property Important. Inside were yellowed papers, including the original deed from 1947 when his great-grandfather had bought the land. Tom read through everything carefully, then sat back with a thoughtful expression. According to these documents, his property line didn't just go to the water's edge. It extended 100 feet into the lake itself, following the curve of the shoreline. For nearly a quarter mile, that included the area where the HOA had built their community lake access point. What's more, there was a letter from the developer who had built Lakeside Estates, dated 1985, asking his grandfather for permission to use the shoreline for resident access. There was no signed agreement, just a handwritten note from his grandfather. Told Jenkins people can use the shore for fishing as long as they respect the land. No building. A slow smile spread across Tom's face. He'd spent the last 5 years working as a paralegal at a law firm specializing in real estate. He knew exactly what these documents meant, and what kind of leverage they gave him against the HOA. I think it's time to make some calls, Tom said to himself, reaching for his phone. The HOA had picked the wrong cabin owner to bully. Monday morning, Tom called in sick to work. He had more important things to do than fix software bugs today. First, he called Mike Chen, a buddy from the law firm who specialized in land disputes. So let me get this straight, Mike said after Tom explained the situation. You inherited a cabin that predates the fancy neighborhood around it, and now they're trying to force you to renovate? Pretty much, Tom replied, pacing around the cabin's small living room. The HOA president left. A violation notice even though my grandfather never joined their association, Mike chuckled. Classic HOA overreach. But what's this about the shoreline? Tom spread the old property documents on the kitchen table, even though Mike couldn't see them over the phone. According to these papers, my family owns not just the cabin but a quarter mile of shoreline and even 100 feet into the lake itself. And the HOA built some kind of beach club right on my property. There was a low whistle from the other end of the line. That changes everything. You need a proper survey done ASAP to confirm the boundaries. I can recommend someone trustworthy. By Wednesday, Tom had taken the whole week off work and was waiting at the cabin when a weathered pickup truck pulled into the driveway. A stocky man with gray hair and a sunburned face stepped out, carrying technical-looking equipment. "You must be Tom," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I'm Bill Fletcher. Been surveying land around here for 30 years now." Tom shook his hand. "Thanks for coming on such short notice," Bill shrugged. "Mike explained it was urgent. Plus I knew your grandfather. Good man. Taught me where to find the best fishing spots on this lake." For the next several hours, Tom followed Bill around the property, watching as he took measurements, consulted maps, and placed small flags at various points. By mid-afternoon, they were wading along the shoreline, Bill occasionally stopping to check his GPS device. "Well, I'll be darned," Bill said as they approached the HOA's beach area. He pointed to a spot about 10 feet to the right of the private Lakeside Estates lake access sign. "According to official records, your property line runs right through here and follows the shoreline all the way to that big pine tree over there." Tom looked where he was pointing. "So their beach, dock, and boat launch. All sitting on your land," Bill confirmed. "And that's not all. Your water rights extend 100 feet into the lake. That means even the swimming area they've roped off is technically yours." A group of kids were playing in that very swimming area now, supervised by parents lounging on what Tom now knew was his beach. No one had asked his permission. No one had even acknowledged that this land belonged to his family. How could they not know this, Tom asked. Bill snorted. "Oh, I bet someone knew. These developers aren't stupid. My guess is they hoped your grandfather would never make a fuss and eventually they'd just take over. Happens more than you'd think." That evening, Tom drove to the county records office an hour away. He spent hours digging through musty files and scrolling through digitized records, piecing together the history of his grandfather's property and the development around it. What he found made his blood boil. In 1985, the original developer of Lakeside Estates had approached his grandfather about buying the shoreline rights. His grandfather had declined, but allowed residents informal access for fishing. There was never any formal agreement signed. Then, in 2010, when the HOA renovated the community beach area and added the dock, they'd simply acted as if they owned it. Tom found permit applications that conveniently omitted mention of the actual property lines. He even discovered a letter from his grandfather objecting to the construction, which had apparently been ignored. At the back of one dusty file, Tom found something that made him sit up straight. It was a handwritten note from his grandfather to the county clerk, dated just 6 months before he passed away. "I'm writing to document that I have never granted Lakeside Estates HOA any permanent rights to my shoreline property. Their recent construction was done without my permission. I'm getting on in years and worry they're just waiting for me to die so they can take what isn't theirs. Please keep this on record." Tom felt a lump in his throat. His grandfather had known exactly what was happening. He'd been fighting this battle alone. The next day, Tom met with Mike and another attorney from the firm who handled property disputes. They spread all the documents across the conference table, including Bill's official survey results. "This is open and shut," the property attorney said, tapping the survey map. "They built on your land without permission. In legal terms, they're trespassing." "So what do I do?" Tom asked. Mike leaned forward. "Well, you could sue them for the past decade of unauthorized use. Probably win a tidy sum. Or," the property attorney added, "you could use this as leverage. They want your cabin to meet their standards? Fine. But it'll cost them legal access to what they've been using all along." Tom thought about how Robert and the others had looked down their noses at his grandfather's cabin, how they'd acted entitled to tell him what he could and couldn't do with his own property. "I think I need to pay Mr. Wilson a visit," Tom said with a grim smile. Before he did that, though, Tom had one more stop to make. He drove to a sign shop in town and ordered several large private property, no trespassing signs. Then he called a security company about installing cameras around the perimeter of his land. "Is there a particular area you're most concerned about?" the security consultant asked. Tom looked out at the lake where several residents were launching kayaks from his shoreline without a clue that their access was about to change. "Yes, he said quietly. The beach and dock area. I need to document everyone who uses it. As he hung up, Tom felt a mixture of emotions. He didn't actually want to cut off lake access to the families who'd been enjoying it for years, but he also couldn't let the HOA bully him or dismiss his property rights. His grandfather had stood his ground against the developers and the HOA for decades. Now it was Tom's turn to fight for what was rightfully his, and he had something his. Grandfather hadn't. Irrefutable proof and legal support. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening. Tom marked it on his calendar and started preparing what he would say. This wasn't just about a rustic cabin anymore. It was about respect, fairness, and standing up to bullies. And Tom was just getting started. The day before the HOA meeting, Tom walked around his property with a hammer and a bag full of private property no trespassing signs. He felt a little bad as he pounded each sign into the ground, especially when he noticed a couple of kids watching him from the water's edge with confused expressions. But he reminded himself that he wasn't the one who had started this fight. By sunset, he had placed signs all along his property line, including several that were clearly visible from the HOA's beach area. He had saved the biggest sign for last, a large red and white one that he placed right next to their Lakeside Estates Lake Access sign. His read, Notice, Private Property, Beach and Dock Access. By permission only. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Tom barely slept that night. He kept imagining the reactions when people saw the signs and wondering if he was doing the right thing. His grandfather had allowed people to use the shoreline for years. But his grandfather hadn't been bullied by the HOA the way Tom was being bullied now. The next morning, Tom's phone rang before he'd even finished his coffee. It was Robert Wilson, and he sounded furious. "What is the meaning of these ridiculous signs?" Robert demanded without even saying hello. "You frightened children and upset residents." Tom took a deep breath. "Those signs mark my legal property line, which your beach club happens to be sitting on." "That's absurd," Robert spluttered. "That beach has been community property for decades." "No, it hasn't," Tom replied calmly. "It's been my family's property for over 70 years. I have the original deeds and a new survey confirming it. Your development never purchased or legally obtained access rights." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Robert spoke again, his voice had changed from angry to concerned. "Look, there must be some misunderstanding. Why? Don't we discuss this like reasonable people? The board meeting is tonight. Come and present your concerns." Tom had planned to attend the meeting anyway, but he enjoyed hearing the new respect in Robert's voice. "I'll be there," he said. 7 o'clock, right?" "Yes, at the community center." "And Tom? Maybe we can come to an arrangement that works for everyone." Tom hung up with a small smile. It was amazing how quickly Robert's attitude had changed when he realized Tom had the upper hand. Throughout the day, Tom watched from his cabin window as groups of residents walked down to look at the signs. Some took photos. Others seemed to be arguing with each other. A security camera Tom had installed captured one man trying to pull up a sign before his wife stopped him. At 6:45 that evening, Tom put on a clean button-down shirt and drove the short distance to the Lakeside Estates Community Center. It was a modern building with large windows overlooking the lake. Windows that, Tom now realized, looked directly at his grandfather's cabin. The parking lot was unusually full, and when Tom walked into the meeting room, he understood why. Instead of the usual handful of residents who attended HOA meetings, the room was packed. At least 50 people filled the chairs, with more standing along the walls. All eyes turned to Tom as he entered. Robert Wilson stood at the front of the room with the other board members. "Ah, Tom, glad you could join us," he said with forced pleasantness. "We've added a special agenda item to discuss the property line situation." Tom nodded and took a seat in the back row, feeling the stares of the residents. He recognized a few as neighbors who had waved to him on his weekend visits, but most were strangers who now looked at him with resentment or curiosity. The meeting began with routine matters: approval of previous minutes, landscaping updates, a reminder about trash collection days. Tom sat quietly, occasionally glancing at the folder of documents he had brought with him. Finally, Robert cleared his throat. Now, as many of you have noticed, there's been some confusion about the property lines around the community lake access area. Mr. Reynolds here has raised some concerns that we'd like to address as a community. A tall woman in the front row raised her hand. What's going on, Robert? My kids came home crying today because someone put up signs saying they couldn't use the beach anymore. Several other residents nodded and murmured in agreement. Robert adjusted his tie nervously. Well, it seems that there might be a discrepancy in the property records. Tom has documentation suggesting that the shoreline where our beach area is located might technically be part of his grandfather's property. The room erupted in voices. That's ridiculous. We've been using that beach for 20 years. How can that be possible? Robert raised his hands for quiet. Please, everyone, we're looking into this matter. Our attorneys are reviewing the situation. He turned to Tom. Perhaps you'd like to explain your position? Tom stood up, feeling strangely calm despite the tension in the room. He walked to the front and faced the crowd. My grandfather bought that cabin and the surrounding land, including the shoreline, in 1947, he began. When your development was built in the 1980s, the developer asked to buy the shoreline rights. My grandfather declined, but allowed residents to use it informally for fishing. Tom held up the survey map so everyone could see. Last week I had the property surveyed. It confirms that my family's land includes not just the shoreline but extends 100 feet into the lake. That includes the entire beach area, dock, and boat launch that you've been using. A middle-aged man in a fishing hat stood up. So what are you saying? You're just going to cut off access after all these years? Tom looked at him steadily. What I'm saying is that the HOA had no right to build permanent structures on my property without permission, and they certainly have no right to tell me what I can do with my cabin. He turned to face Robert and the board members. A week ago, you left a notice on my door demanding I renovate my cabin to meet your standards. You threatened me with fines and legal action if I didn't comply. Tom held up the crumpled violation notice. But you have no authority over my property. And now I've discovered you've been trespassing on my land for years. Nancy, the HOA treasurer, leaned forward. What exactly do you want, Tom? It was the question Tom had been waiting for. He looked around the room at the concerned faces of the residents, families who just wanted to enjoy the lake, people who had bought homes believing the beach access was legitimately theirs. I want respect for my property rights, Tom said firmly. I want acknowledgement that my cabin is exempt from your HOA rules, and I want a formal agreement that properly recognizes my ownership of the shoreline, with fair compensation for its use. Robert's face had turned an interesting shade of red. And if we don't agree to your demands? Tom shrugged. Then the signs stay up, and anyone using my property without permission will be trespassing. My attorneys are prepared to pursue all legal remedies, including compensation for years of unauthorized use. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed his words. Tom felt no joy in the moment, just a sense that he was standing up for what was right, for himself and for his grandfather's memory. A heavy silence hung in the community center as Tom finished speaking. People exchanged worried glances, and a few parents hugged their children closer. Robert looked like he'd swallowed something sour, while Nancy whispered urgently to other board members. Finally, an older man in the back stood up slowly. I've lived here for 15 years, he said in a gravelly voice. Fished off that dock nearly every morning. Never knew we were on someone else's property. He looked directly at Robert. Did the board know about this? Robert tugged at his collar. There were uncertainties about exact boundaries. Our understanding was that there was an informal agreement. So you did know, the man interrupted. You knew and built anyway. He turned to Tom. Son, I don't blame you for being upset. I'd feel the same way. A younger woman with 2 small children spoke up next. My kids learned to swim at that beach. We have community events there every summer. Her voice trembled slightly. Is there any way we can work this out? We're not all like the board. Tom felt a pang of sympathy. Most of these people were innocent in this situation. They'd just wanted homes by a beautiful lake. They weren't responsible for the HOA's tactics. "I'm not interested in punishing families who just want to enjoy the lake," Tom said. "My grandfather allowed people to fish from the shoreline for decades. I'm not against sharing. I'm against being bullied and having my property rights ignored." Robert cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should adjourn and have our attorneys review." "No," Tom interrupted firmly. "No more delays or legal games. I've been more than patient." He pulled out a document from his folder. "I've prepared a proposal. It's simple. The HOA acknowledges in writing that my cabin is exempt from all community standards and regulations. In exchange, I'll grant a formal easement for residents to use the beach and dock area, with certain conditions." "What conditions?" Nancy asked suspiciously. "The HOA pays a fair annual fee for use of the property. The money goes into a trust for lake conservation. The HOA covers insurance and maintenance of the facilities they built without permission, and a plaque is installed acknowledging that the beach access is provided through the generosity of the Reynolds family." Robert scoffed. "That's extortion." The room erupted again, but this time many voices were directed at Robert, not Tom. "You're the one who started this, Robert. We could lose our beach access completely. Just fix this before summer starts." Tom watched as the community's anger shifted away from him and toward their own leadership. He hadn't expected that, but he wasn't sorry to see it. A woman who had been quietly sitting in the corner finally stood up. She looked to be in her 70s with silver hair and a no-nonsense expression. "I've been on this lake longer than most of you," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I knew Tom's grandfather, Bill. He was a good man who loved this lake and shared it generously, but he also warned the original developers not to take advantage." She looked pointedly at Robert. "If the board had approached this young man respectfully instead of trying to bully him, we wouldn't be in this mess." Several people nodded in agreement. "I move that we accept Tom's proposal and stop this nonsense," she concluded, sitting back down. After much debate and a few attempts by Robert to delay, the residents voted overwhelmingly to accept Tom's terms. The board had no choice but to agree to draft a formal agreement based on his proposal. As the meeting broke up, several residents approached Tom to introduce themselves properly. Some apologized for the board's behavior, while others shared stories about his grandfather. "Your grandpa taught my boy to fish," one man said, shaking Tom's hand warmly. "Never knew we were technically trespassing on his land when we did it." The older woman who had spoken up approached last. "Bill would be proud of you," she said. "He stood his ground too, but he never forgot to be a good neighbor. Seems like you're cut from the same cloth." Over the next month, lawyers from both sides hammered out the details of the agreement. The HOA officially recognized that Tom's cabin was exempt from all their regulations, and he granted them a formal easement for the beach and dock. The annual fee they would pay would go into a new lake conservation fund. As spring turned to summer, Tom spent more and more weekends at the cabin. He fixed the roof, replaced some rotted boards on the dock, and gave the place a fresh coat of the same dark green paint his grandfather had always used. Definitely not on the HOA's approved color palette. One warm Saturday in July, Tom was sitting on his dock fishing when he noticed Robert walking hesitantly down the path toward him. The HOA president looked uncomfortable, nothing like his usual confident self. "Morning," Tom called, not getting up. Robert nodded. "Good morning. Catch anything?" "Couple of bass, threw them back." Robert shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Look, I wanted to say—" He paused, clearly struggling. "Well, I may have been overzealous about the regulations." Tom reeled in his line and set the rod down. "That's one way to put it." "The conservation fund is a good idea," Robert continued. "We're organizing a cleanup day next month. Thought you might want to be involved, since it was your idea." Tom studied the man for a moment. Was this a genuine olive branch or just for show? Either way, his grandfather would have given Robert a chance to make things right. "I'll be there," Tom said. "My grandfather always said the lake belongs to everyone, and no one. Our job is just to take care of it while we're here." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Wise man, your grandfather." He turned to go, then stopped. "Your cabin. It looks good with the new roof. Has character." Tom smiled. Thanks. It's not going anywhere. As Robert walked away, Tom cast his line back into the clear water. The community kids were playing on the beach in the distance, their laughter carrying across the water. A pair of loons called to each other near the far shore. Tom had come here looking for a simple weekend retreat and found himself drawn into a battle over property rights. But in standing up for himself, he'd somehow found something more valuable, a connection to his grandfather's legacy and a place where he truly belonged. The cabin would never meet the HOA's fancy standards, and that was perfectly fine. With its weathered wood and green paint, it would continue to stand as a reminder that sometimes the oldest things have the deepest roots and the strongest claims to their place in the world.